Any ads heard during this episode that are not in our voice are placed by third-party agencies. They should not be considered the opinion of or to be endorsed by Hoosier Myths and Legends.
Welcome to another episode of the Hoosier Myths and Legends podcast.
I'm Rebecca Wilhelm.
I'm Mary Quigley.
And I'm Hope Wilhelm.
Join us as we dive into the spookier side of the Hoosier state.
So what comes to your mind when you think of Indiana? Do you think of corn? Do you think of basketball? Do you think of the Indianapolis 500? Maybe you think of famous celebrities who were born in Indiana, like John Mellencamp or Michael Jackson.
But as the saying goes, there is more than corn in Indiana. 92 counties make up the Hoosier state. In this podcast, we are going to discuss some Indiana folklore from each of these counties. If you are into tall tales, ghosts, or spooky legends, then this is a podcast you are not going to want to miss. The tales that we have for you today are not specific to any one part of Indiana. Today, we're going to discuss some premonitions that have been recorded in the Hoosier state.
The idea of people being able to glimpse into the future has intrigued many of us for centuries. However, this is not something that is unique to only Indiana. One of the earliest accounts of premonitions can actually be found in the Bible, in the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph, who is the son of Jacob, has several dreams that tell his future. In one of the dreams, Joseph sees himself and his brothers binding sheaves of grain in the field. And then his sheaf rises and stands upright while his brother's sheaves gather around and bow down to it. In another dream, he sees the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. What these dreams foretell is Joseph's rise to power in Egypt and how his family would eventually come to him for help during a famine. In fact, if you search throughout history, in many cultures you will find many premonition legends, from dreams that have turned into a reality, signs of a death to come, and also intuitive hunches that have saved lives. We have gathered a few premonition stories that have happened to fellow Hoosiers. So grab a cup of coffee and sit back and relax as we explore the extraordinary phenomena of premonitions.
Premonitions are fascinating and something I don't hear mentioned lately.
I agree. I know that there are many times that I have felt like I've dreamed or had a feeling of something to happen.
I have too. In fact, I'm going to share a personal account of a premonition dream that I had at the end of this episode.
So let's go ahead and get into it. I want to start off with a phenomenon that's known as death tokens. And this is when someone has what they feel is a sign of a death to come.
We are going to start off with some of the premonitions from Ronald Baker's book, Hoosier Folk Legends.
Really, this book is what I would call the holy grail of all things strange and spooky in Indiana. And Mr. Baker was actually the head of the English department at Indiana State University when I was a student there in the late 90s. And the book, Hoosier Folk Legends, is a collection of stories from all over the state of Indiana that are also in the Indiana State University Folk Archives. And they're a public record.
The Indiana State University Folklore Archives are amazing.
It's something that really is cool. And I was fortunate enough to experience this while an ISU student. Back then, it was the room with rows upon rows of filing cabinets. Now it's available online to anyone.
There are some amazing stories documented on the website. Students archive these stories that have been told.
And we will have a link to the website in our show notes.
Something that we have come to realize in our research is that a ball of fire is a common legend in American folklore. It's not just specific to Indiana. The first legend we're going to read is a legend about this phenomenon known as a fireball.
Now, according to Ronald Baker's notes in the back of the Hoosier Folk Legends book, is that this fireball legend's common and it's told throughout the United States. And the belief is that this ball of fire appears whenever someone is sick or dying, and to see such a thing is thought to be bad luck.
The legend we're going to read to you is from Huntington County, Indiana.
And this legend is called Ball of Fire as Death Token.
When I was 9 years old, I lived in the country and attended a country school. It was about a mile from my house. On my way to school, I passed the home of Merle Myers, a girl a little older than I. One Friday afternoon, we were walking home from school together, and as we neared her home, she screamed. And when I asked her what was the matter, she told me that she had seen a big ball of fire in the back of her house. I did not see anything. Her people were superstitious and believed in such things as death tokens.
The next day, about 11 o'clock, her little brother Tony, who was a little past 2 years old, was burned to death. The father had put small potatoes in a large iron kettle out of doors over a fire to cook them for the hogs. Before he left for the woods to work for the day, he cautioned the family to keep the little children away from the fire. The mother was just getting up for the first time as she had a 10-day-old baby, and Muriel was busy helping with the housework.
Tony got out of the house and too near the fire. Muriel heard his screams, but Tony had run as far as he could before he fell in the snow with all his clothes burned off, but the neckband of his dress and his shoes. He lived for about 1 hour. Muriel thought that the ball of fire she had seen the evening before was a token of Tony's death.
Now that is really creepy.
It is.
I am fascinated with this phenomenon of death tokens.
The next legend we have for you is called Flaming Torch as Death Token.
This legend was added to the ISU Folk Archives back in 1968.
A friend of mine worked on the railroad near Huron, Indiana. At this time, he had a very sick daughter at home. This particular evening, he got off the hand car and had to walk several blocks in the snow to his home in the dark.
He was worried about his daughter, and in those days, phones were nearly unheard of, so he had to wait till he got home to find out how his daughter was. He was hurrying along in the darkness, and all at once he noticed on the left a flaming torch was following him in the ditch.
And it stayed with him all the way home. His wife met him at the door crying and told him that their daughter had just died. He believes to this day that the torch was a warning of his daughter's death.
Another token of death that we have always heard about is the belief that hearing 3 knocks means that death is coming.
This is something that I can remember hearing relatives talk about.
So the next legend we have for you from the book Hoosier Folk Legends is called 3 Raps on a House as Death Token.
This legend was collected and was also added to the ISU Folk Archives in 1968.
And I was telling Mary this earlier, but 1968 seems to be the year for these legends to be added to the ISU Folk Archives. So here we go. At 2 o'clock one morning, a farm family near here was awakened by a knocking sound. They heard 3 loud raps against the side of the house. Wondering what it could be, they got up to investigate.
At first, they thought that a tree branch was hitting the house, but there were no trees close enough. Besides, the wind was dead calm. Unable to find the cause, they all went back to bed. The next morning, they received a telegram. Their grandmother had died unexpectedly at 2 o'clock that morning.
And we will be back after a short break to discuss the phenomenon of dreams.
The next legend we have for you is from 1959, and it concerns a dream that ended up keeping a family safe.
This story is called Premonitions Sensing Danger Before It Occurs, and it was added to the Indiana State University Folk Archives in 2011 by one of the professors at ISU. It is a personal story.
This happened when I was 12 years old, and the memory is as vivid now as it was all those years ago. It is amazing. I was on vacation with my family, so that would have been my father, my mother, and my older brother and me, the 4 of us. And we were heading west. We lived in Chicago, and this was a huge deal. We were taking this big family trip out west, and we were going to Yellowstone National Park and staying at the Old Faithful Inn. My father had made a reservation there, and we were staying in little motels along the way.
We had not been west, so this was a huge deal for the family to be going out into the vast regions of America. I remember that. We were staying at these little motels along the side of the road. So we were at this motel, probably in Montana, and the plan was the following day we were going to get up early and drive most of the day and get to Yellowstone that night and stay at the Old Faithful Inn. The night before we were going to make that drive, we were all asleep, and I had a dream that was absolutely terrified me.
There were flames. There were people crowding and pushing. It was at night. Everyone was screaming. It was the most horrible dream, and I woke up and I knew, even though I was only 12 years old, I knew it was not an ordinary nightmare. There was something more to it. I was upset. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and then in the morning I started pleading with my parents not to go to Yellowstone. Everyone was furious with me. It's like, this is the point of our vacation. What is the matter?
I said, I don't know. We just can't go. There's something wrong. My mother, who is very practical, was pretty annoyed. But my father finally relented. He said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just hang out here and we'll do some things around here and we won't go. My brother was furious because this was like the whole point of the vacation. So we didn't do it. Go.
We just kind of went around and saw some things near the motel, and we spent the following night in the same motel. I didn't have any dreams that night. The next morning, my father went to get the newspaper, which he always did no matter where we were. He liked this paper.
Okay, listeners, this is the part of the story that always gives me chills.
The headline on the newspaper was Earthquake at Yellowstone, Old Faithful Inn on Fire. And we all just flipped out, the whole family. We all started crying. It was an amazing experience because it was clear that I had a premonition. So we never went, and we ended up just driving back to Chicago.
On August the 17th, 1959, a 7.2 earthquake occurred. People commonly refer to this event as the Yellowstone earthquake.
This caused 28 deaths, a landslide, and damage that cost $115 million in today's money.
An interesting fact is that the Madison River was blocked, and this created Quake Lake.
According to the Yellowstone.org website, the Old Faithful Inn was damaged during the quake.
So I clearly believe that this was some kind of warning that she received.
I agree with you.
The next story we have for you concerning dreams that foretell a prophecy is a personal experience, a dream that Mary had the night before our mother passed away in 2011.
I wrote about my dream in my book, Lessons My Mother Taught Me, in 2012.
Our mother was in a medically induced coma and on a ventilator in September of 2011.
She was having complications from pneumonia.
And I'm going to have Mary read the account of the dream that she had.
This is the first time I've read the account of this dream.
Are you ready?
Here goes. On the evening of September 6, 2011, our family made the decision to let the doctor try one more treatment. If we came in the next morning and there was no improvement, we would take her off the machines. The doctors recommended that we go home for the night and get some sleep. I think they knew that the next day would be bad for us. I don't know how I slept that night, but somehow I did. It must have been pure exhaustion. I ended up having a dream about my mother. I don't usually put much thought into dreams, but this one was so vivid that it stood out as something different. In the dream, my mother and I were driving in downtown Indianapolis as I was on my way home from work. My mother had never seen my place of work, nor had I ever driven in downtown with her. It seemed odd. We were having a great time listening to some of her favorite songs when suddenly the car broke down. The engine wouldn't start, my door fell off, the tire was flat, and every time we tried to fix something, another thing would break. I became very upset and tried to call my father. There was no answer. I tried to call again. There was still no answer. There I was sitting in the car crying and trying to call my dad. Meanwhile, my mother was in the passenger seat shaking her head and saying, "It's not going to work, it's broken, and no one is answering." She kept repeating it over and over. When I woke up the next morning, I cried.
This story has always given me chills.
I think that was my wake-up call that Mom wasn't going to get better. She was broken, and we needed to let her go.
I've always thought that too.
Have you ever experienced a premonition that came true? We would love to hear about it. Please send us an email to HoosierMythsAndLegends@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media. We may use it in a later episode. In the email, let us know if you wish to remain anonymous.
To see our source material, please visit our website, HoosierMythsAndLegends.com. Please find us and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok. Hoosier Myths and Legends is a Quigley Productions podcast.
Our theme song was written and recorded by Wet Blanket. The song title is Taxidermy Race Car.
As always, stay spooky.